a spider that got stuck in its own web. That was Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus. Hitler's craziness kept him at Stalingrad, and then Stalin's secret police taught him again. He was a ghost for the last several years of his life, and the Stasi watched him all the time. But this ghost did leave something behind. Pace's allegedly safe residence held one last secret, a hidden stash of papers. When it was finally found, it prompted doubts, so serious that the proof had to be thrown away for good. The demise of the Sixth Army. The winter of 1943 was a still and silent graveyard. The Sixth Army, which had once been proud and had more than 300,000 men, was stuck amid the frozen remains of Stalingrad. It had turned into a living monument to loss. You see, thousands of soldiers died in icy dungeons or starved to death in the snow while artillery shells fell like judgment from above. There was a man in the middle of it all who used to be a symbol of German discipline and accuracy: Friedrich Paulus, Field Marshal. Pace's climb through the ranks had been marked by order and control up to that point. He was a staff officer, a planner, and a man who kept his reports neat and made sure his moves were well thought out. But Stalingrad was a complete mess, and no amount of planning could rectify what the Eastern Front had turned into. The Soviet soldiers and encirclement cut off supplies, hope, and contact. To say the least, it was a terrible position. Hitler nonetheless told Paulus to hold the city at all costs. As the temperature dropped well below zero, such costs became impossible to imagine. Hitler made Pace a field marshal on January 30, 1943, but this wasn't a present. No one tells you this, but it was a grim message. In all of history, no German field marshal had ever given up. It was evident what the meaning was. People thought Pace would kill himself instead than being caught. Paulus, on the other hand, was thin and tired and didn't want to kill himself for a ruler he had grown to doubt. The next day, he gave up to the Red Army. Berlin saw the news as treachery when it got there, but for those who saw Paulus' sad eyes as he walked out of the rubble, it wasn't treachery. It was about staying alive. He quickly became the highest-ranking German officer ever taken alive. What no one understood at the time was that his choice would not only impact his own life, but it would also start a chain of events that would follow him for the rest of his life, all the way to a quiet street in Dresden. You see, the Soviets saw his worth right away. He wasn't merely a prisoner. He was a chance. They observed him, and over the years he was in jail. Something inside Powell changed. By the time he testified against his old friends at the Nuremberg trials in 1946, the change was complete. The soldier who used to work for Hitler's army now spoke out for the Allies. His voice was calm, but what he said was terrible. It seemed if Stalingrad had broken not only his army, but also his whole way of thinking. Even then, people were talking about him. People said he had been taught again. Others said he was only acting to remain alive. His time in the Soviet Union was odd because he was both privileged and imprisoned under intense monitoring. He was well cared for, politely guarded, and kept out of the public eye. The Soviets wanted him to be alive but quiet, helpful but not too much. By the early 1950s, when Stalin's death changed the course of policy, Pace was finally able to go back to Germany. But it wasn't the same Germany he had known. He was sent to the city of Dresden in East Germany, which was still scarred by fire and war. The government gave him a villa on Piestrasse. It looked like a sign of respect to the rest of the world. People who knew how politics worked back then saw it as more of a gilded prison. The feared East German secret police, the Stasi, kept a careful eye on him and wrote down who came to see him and what they said. Friedrich Paul lived out his last years in that big villa, which was full with microphones and suspicion. He was both a symbol and a ghost of Germany's disintegration. It would take years for what he left behind when he died in 1957 to come to light. When officials went into his house, they found more than just his things. They found signs of a life that was connected to the secrets of two governments and a mystery that still whispers from the quiet walls of his Dresden mansion. But getting him was only the start of a far worse scenario: the change in Moscow. When the Soviets took Friedrich Paul into prison, they didn't put him in a cell. He was secretly taken to a complex far away from the front. He was, after all, the most important thing in the conflict. The Red Army didn't need to humiliate him, they needed to use him. At first, Pace kept his silence. He declined to collaborate. But as weeks turned into months and months became years, the walls of pride began to crumble. The Soviets were patient. They realized that even the strongest beliefs might be broken by time and being alone. When they told him how Hitler reacted to his surrender, how the Führer labeled him a shame to Germany, it hurt him more than any interrogator could. That was the moment when things changed. The man who lived by loyalty was kicked out, and the Soviets saw their chance in that loneliness. They moved Paulus to a place close to Moscow. There, he started getting books, reports, and carefully chosen visitors. Soviet officers argued with him, and German communists who had fled to Moscow tried to get him to listen to his conscience. They slowly told him a new story that Hitler had betrayed Germany instead of saving it. But here's the best part. They didn't just break him, they also hired him. He became a member of the NKVD, or National Committee for a Free Germany. This was a group of German officers who had been captured and were being supported by the Soviet Union. Soon, Paulus's voice was being sent across radio waves back to the German front lines, telling his old soldiers to put down their weapons and fight against Hitler. His old friends were shocked, to say the least. To them, this was the worst thing a person could do. Was it a real belief or just a way to stay alive? That inquiry would always hurt his reputation. The change was complete enough for the Soviets to take him to Nuremberg by 1946. Many people didn't realize that he wasn't a defendant. He was a witness for the prosecution. A ghost appeared when he walked into the courtroom. His face was slender, and he was wearing a plain civilian suit instead of a uniform. He spoke in a calm, systematic way about how the Germans operated at Stalingrad and confirmed what he knew about Hitler's military involvement. His testimony made the room shake. The Soviets didn't let him go after Nuremberg. They moved him to a guarded house outside of Moscow, where he was always being watched. He could write letters, but only while someone was watching. He couldn't get in touch with his family in West Germany. Soviet historians started to take an interest in his writings, tactical sketches, notes, and memoranda from the war around this time. Then, in 1953, everything changed. Stalin died. The new leaders of the Soviet Union sought to seem more helpful. One of the gestures of goodwill was the choice to send back a number of well-known German Poles. That list has Paulus's name on it. Instead of being transferred to his house in West Germany, he was sent to the east to the German Democratic Republic. The Soviets wanted to use him one last time in the rubble of Dresden. He was supposed to be a living example of how to change. He was put in a cage with gold bars and ears on the walls. The Stasi were watching. The city still looked like a wound. That hadn't healed when Friedrich Paulus got to Dresden in 1953. But in the middle of the ruins, the East German government gave Paulus a place to live, a big villa on a hill with a view of the El River. But this was controlled hospitality. The Ministry for State Security quickly gave the property a code name, the Stasi. It was dubbed Object Terrace, and every corner had wires in it. There were microphones hidden in the lamps, listening devices in the walls, and agents pretending to be gardeners and housekeepers. The phone lines were tapped and plain clothes. Agents were on duty 24/7 nearby, keeping track of everyone who came and went. This was a full-blown police state that was only interested in one old man. For most people in Dresden, Paulus was just a memory. People knew where he resided, but not many of them went there. His name still had the weight of Stalingrad, which was half tragedy and half treason. Former police would not talk to them. Western reporters who asked for interviews were always turned down. But he nevertheless acted like a soldier behind the huge gates. He got up early, took very detailed notes, and set up his desk as if he were going to be checked. People who lived nearby often observed him going alone. He walked slowly with a straight back and an unreadable look on his face. He was officially retired. He was a prisoner in plain sight, but not formally. The walls of the villa appeared to hold secrets. Pace had a modest study on the top floor that looked out over the river. He spent hours composing letters there. But here's the deal. The Stasi read every single one, whether they were sent or not. They kept an eye on more than just his calls. They also listened in on his talks at home. Object Terrace is secure, one report said in a harsh tone, as if it were describing a castle. Even though there were rules, Pau stayed calm on the outside. People who talked to him in his last years said that he was still full of guilt. He read books about military history, collected maps, and wrote letters to old co-workers that were carefully screened. There were rumors going around among East German officers, though. There were rumors that Paulus had concealed personal notes and records from the conflict inside the villa's walls. Some others even thought he had been writing private, unedited letters to Soviet officers that went against the public story of his conversion. The Stasi heard the tales, but they could only watch and wait as long as Paulus remained alive. The Stasi ultimately made their move after he died in 1957. What was inside the boxes? The home on Prostrasse was closed off for a few weeks after Friedrich Paulus died in February 1957. The obituary in East German papers was concise and to the point. There was no mention of Stalingrad and no mention of the spying. In late spring, a small number of Stasi cops showed in. Their job was officially straightforward: make a list of his things for the state archives. The command came from above, but not publicly. They were supposed to investigate the house carefully and get back any items that had political or ideological importance. That unclear wording indicated one thing: they were seeking for hidden things. The agents got to work. The study was tidy. The shelves were full of history books and presents from the previous Soviet Union. But they found something in the back of the upstairs study, behind a large, massive bookshelf, that made them stop in their tracks. A sliding panel hides a narrow door that is locked. The hinges were old, and wax had been put in the keyhole. This wasn't merely a place to keep things. This was a safe. Historians are still shocked because of what they found inside. There was still a strong smell of paper in the air. There were boxes of handwritten notes, maps, and sealed envelopes with Soviet symbols on them stacked up in that hidden area. This wasn't the collection of a simple retiree. There were records of German officers who had given up at Stalingrad. There were letters in Paulus' neat handwriting, some to Soviet officials and some to his family. They were all drafts that had clearly never been sent. And then there came the thing that blew up. Years later, stories said that one of the Stasi officers found manuscripts of speeches that were never given. One of them, unbelievably, was a declaration that condemned both Hitler and Stalin. In 1957, this was political dynamite. The materials were soon taken away, sealed, and moved to a part of the Berlin archives that was off limits. No one ever saw any of it. One officer from Stasi said that the find was a politically sensitive collection. The cops who handled the items were moved to different jobs since they were so dangerous. Within weeks, all references to the Paulus File were removed from Stasi records. What did the papers say? The question didn't only confuse historians. It left them dumbfounded. People started to guess what was in that secret area. People said that the publications had proof that Paulus was playing a deadly double game. They said in hushed tones that he had kept in touch with powerful Soviet generals in secret long after he was caught. What were they talking about? What were his real loyalties? Some people said the files were even more dangerous. They whispered that the careful Paulus had saved copies of the initial raw interrogations. These weren't the clean, official accounts. They were the true transcripts, the ones that went against the official story of how he suddenly became a supporter of the Soviet Union. Was his whole defection a well-planned lie? Some even said there was a worse secret. They mentioned that the secret area had a ledger and coded notes in it. These notes are said to have connected high-ranking Soviet officials to actions taken during the conflict that the government had tried to hide. Harsh, inconvenient realities that the world was never meant to know. What do you suppose those files held? Was Paulus a great spy, a real conversion, or merely a piece in a bigger game? Please tell us in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe and like this page to get more hidden stories.